owners and people who make a difference in the community.
Well, welcome to our second half hour of the Mark and Robert show.
Well, there you go. You should take it on tour.
Yeah. Actually, I've heard my friend...
but then I'd have to leave Cambridge.
I have a friend named Mark who used to do a radio show, apparently, I think with Tufts. He was actually on the air this weekend. And they had this really great line for it, because they were both doing the radio show together. And it was Mark on the mic, Mike on the mark.
There you go.
Yeah, it was good. But I'm Robert, so
You're Robert, so it doesn't work for
that.
But, you know, it's funny. There's another Mark McGovern who's a social worker in Cambridge who works for the Cambridge Health Alliance. And I've never met him, but for years, he gets people, like I hear stories, that we have mutual people that we know, so he gets people coming up to him and saying, oh, I love what you do with special education, whatever. And I get people that come up and tell, you know, and it's like, yeah, wrong one, but I'm glad you like what he's doing.
That's good.
So I gotta pop into the Health Alliance and, you know, I don't know, go have a beer or something, and you know,
Absolutely.
And that we're same name, same field, same work. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Well, we spent the last half hour sort of talking about more human stuff, and not that government is inhuman. We certainly hope it isn't. But, you know, there are some things, I think, to be said about just how government functions. And you have a pretty good perspective now, having served on the school committee and now making the transition to being on the city council. And, you know, so I thought, well, maybe you'd be a good person just talking about governance in general. And one thing that, just to sort of kick it off here, I mean, it's not like I'm speaking entirely spontaneously. I actually wrote down a few thoughts here, so if you don't mind if I refer to them occasionally here. The one thing I thought I might ask you would be just if you have any particular thoughts on what makes elected bodies function well. Or not well. What are sort of the do's and don'ts of being an elected official and having the body act effectively?
Yeah. It's a good question. And, you know, I think we have a system here that is good in some ways, and in some ways not so good.
Talking about PR?
PR, the 2-year terms.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we have some things that give us some hurdles. I think that if we had a different, now maybe we'd have different hurdles, but anyway, we can talk about that in a minute. But I think, you know, you have to try your best not to take things personally.
Right.
And I'm talking, you know, as a body, and I said this in the last half hour, and I've said it before, that, you know, if you and I completely disagree on an issue, and we may get, you know, maybe we step out of the congenial, because things get heated, and that happens, you know. But that can't carry over to the next issue. And I think where bodies fall apart, and this can go for at the national level or anywhere else too, is that when there's that unwillingness to appreciate the good idea of someone else simply because you may not like that person, or that person voted against something you wanted to do, and so that person is forever off your list, and you won't vote for things that important things, because the reality is most of the stuff is unanimous, because most of the stuff is not huge. But, you know, so how do you not take things personally? How do you disagree with someone, and even when that disagreement turns heated, how do you let that go so that on the next issue you can maybe be standing side by side with that person? And so to me, it's sort of not taking things too personally. Communication. I don't think anybody likes to be surprised.
Right.
Or made to look foolish or disrespected. And this is not just amongst the elected officials, but it's about the city administration, whether it's the school administration or the city manager. How do you know, if I have, on school committee, if I had something that I didn't agree with the superintendent about, I would call him ahead of time and say, look, I got an issue with this.
Right.
I would advocate my position. Maybe he would agree with me, maybe he wouldn't, but I would say, just so you know, this is the position I'm taking, because nobody likes to be in that position where you feel like you're being embarrassed or you're being disrespected. So, you know, not taking things personally, being respectful, communicating with each other, you know, and I think if you do that far more often than not, you're going to be okay.
You know, Cambridge has certainly gone through periods of years where there were major ideological divides. I think everybody's favorite example and most appropriate example was the rent control years, where there were sort of ideological handlers. You had people, you'd better sort of line up this way, and you guys have to line up that way, and never the twain shall meet, which is sort of similar, or at least comparable to some of the sort of impasse that you see at the national level these days. There are these sort of ideological handlers. Now, we have things we all disagree with, like, development issues in Central Square, whatever, but, I don't think we really have that kind of scale of ideological divide in this city. There are going to be particular issues. I think, it's a big controversy. Well, I don't know if it's even a controversy, but an unsettled matter of the Foundry building in East Cambridge. And, again, there's some zoning proposals coming down the pike for Central Square and I guess Kendall Square as well. But, honestly, I think these aren't sort of ideological divides so much. It's sort of like how we probably all end up kind of wanting many of the same things and are just sort of trying to figure out what are the right trade-offs. But it's not like a divide.
No, certainly not as clear-cut, I think, as during the rent control years. And but even that, talking about rent control, I had this sort of unique perspective. My family owned some property, so we were small property owners, but politically, philosophically, emotionally, I was a rent control supporter.
Absolutely.
And so, but I also got to see the other side of it.
Yeah.
And I got to see what happened when the tenant in my grandmother's apartment refused to pay rent for 2 years because the person living below her interfered with her quiet enjoyment by putting his toilet seat up and down too loud.
Right.
And at the time, the rent control board said, okay, you don't have to pay rent.
Yeah.
And my family lost the rent for 2 years, had to go to court, pay for attorneys. The person declares bankruptcy, and my family loses that. So, even though I ideologically believed in rent control and still do, and believe that since we lost it, it dramatically changed the city.
Very
the
much.
reality is that some of the small property owners had a gripe.
You had a great point. And so you had a good education. You got to see multiple sides of an issue here. And
So how do you...
all the better.
So as a social worker, which is what I am professionally, I solve problems. And sometimes you have to step back from the emotion or your ideological position to solve problems with people that you don't agree with people you don't like, with people that have done terrible things, but how do you then, because what happened was because those two sides it became such a politically powerful position. You were for or against it, and that's how you got elected, right? And since it's been gone in a way that I wish it wasn't, everyone is scrambling for how do they define themselves.
It's true. I think politically we were in kind of a almost chaotic environment where, it's like little mini alliances of group based on this little...
Right.
This
And so
that.
I wonder, if I were I was younger then, and not as involved, politically, I wonder if we could, who would have sat down and said, let me reach across the aisle here. And,
that was a politically risky thing to do back then.
Absolutely. And that gets me back a little bit to our system. When you need 10% of the vote to get elected, the easiest thing to do
is be divisive.
Is polarize yourself, whatever the issue is, and I'm not taking sides on what the issue is.
It's true.
The easiest thing to do is appeal to your 10% and hold on to them for everything, and you get reelected. But the reality is that sometimes the truth is in the middle. Sometimes you don't get everything that you want. Sometimes you have to reach across the aisle and compromise. People talk, we want people who compromise and collaborate, but only when they do that on issues that they agree with, right? They don't want their people to collaborate. They want the other side to collaborate.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if you want the other side to collaborate, you have to be willing to do it too. And I think that's hard to do politically because, especially when you need 10% of the vote, because it's just easier to say, no, this is where I stand firmly. I'm not even going to entertain that side. But that doesn't get you to a better place all the time.
In a way, this is almost, and I might make the argument then for why people should vote not based on issues. They should vote based on representativeness. So, so I'm from East Cambridge. I might vote for Tim Toomey because he's my guy from East Cambridge. Somebody else from Cambridgeport might vote for somebody based on that. So, if your 10% is based on more or less where you live, and it's not necessarily based on some ideological divide, there's a real possibility people could just sort of get along, and just have a conversation and come to good consensus.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we don't have districts. And I do try, have always tried to really take my citywide
Yeah, I think
role
people
seriously.
People have to do it,
Um,
but the system, it usually ends up, is that you may not have districts, but people do have to
Yeah.
run at a political basis. So,
Right.
you know, you end up with some people from West Cambridge and North
Right.
Cambridge and East Cambridge and Cambridgeport and whatever, and through some miracle, it somehow works itself out so
Right.
that it's reasonably representative.
But you know, it is risky politically, I think, on any level, to say, you know, and you know, we see it with Obama, right? I mean, he compromised on some things I'm not terribly happy that he compromised about, but I also, he had to do that in order to do other things, and
Yeah.
I think it's like any profession or any job. Until you actually do it, you don't quite realize how complicated it is, and so there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of people who say, well, if I were there, I would do this, and then they get in and they say, oh, wait a minute, those people didn't do it not because they were bad people, they didn't do it because
Yep.
it's actually more complicated,
Right.
you know, and so it's.
All right, well,
it's hard.
I have a question about this.
All right.
You know, it's like, so a week and change ago, there was a mayoral election. Now, you know, my experience is that, you know, there can be all sorts of controversy over a mayoral election, but 2 or 3 weeks later, people have more or less forgotten.
Yeah.
Maybe not always so quickly for some of the elected officials if there was some controversy.
Yeah.
But it kind of brings up the question, like, how important is the chair of a body? I mean, so David Marr will now serve as mayor, which is a nice choice in my opinion, for the next 2 years. You know, if it was David Marr versus someone else here, how influential is it being a mayor as chair of both school committee
Yeah.
or city council?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the school committee perspective, since that's what I know best, and I can, and this isn't about, I'll talk in more general terms as opposed to individuals, because I think everybody who I've served with has brought something,
Yeah.
you know, to the committee. But the school committee it's funny when the mayor chairs the school committee, because the school committee doesn't vote for the mayor.
Right.
And really has no input. I mean, people meet with us and we say what we want and what we like and but the council does what they do, right? And so the school committee gets whoever the council gives them, which I think having the mayor on the school committee is great.
Right, that's the bridge.
I think it's the bridge. I think it's great. I even don't have a problem with the mayor being the chair of the school committee. I know some people have said the mayor should just be a member but not the chair. I don't necessarily have a problem with the mayor being a chair. But the hard part is that what's the agenda and personality of the person in that chair? Because they may only be there for 2 years, where on the council they may be a councilor for 14 years. And so there's sometimes when they come in, it's this, I've got my 2 years to make my mark.
You got it. Yep.
And not in a bad way, right? Because
Right.
we all care about education, and we all, I mean, it's not, I'm not, you know, but they come in and say, here's my chance to actually sort of really have an impact.
Right.
But if that impact isn't in line with the direction that the school committee and the administration is already going, it can derail that.
Cross purposes.
Right. So having, I think, having a mayor who can come in and say, okay, this isn't about me. Where's the school committee? What's the direction you're going in? You know, how can I facilitate that? Here's something I really want to do. Find their niche, and they should have that, but also manage it better. And I think that's the biggest obstacle
You know,
that I felt on the school committee
It's,
was, I have no say in this, and yet this person could or could not move things forward.
This reminds me of something I've said and I've witnessed over the years up at City Hall. I guess we might put it in the category of advocacy from the chair. And I remember when Alice Wolf was mayor, I think she was a great mayor, but when there was something that really, really mattered to her, she always, without fail, had somebody else step up and take the gavel, chair the meeting, while she sat down and took a councilor's seat and spoke from Councilor so-and-so's seat, and says when she was going to be an advocate for something, she would never do it from the chair. And I thought that was a great thing to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And I kind of feel that way to this day too, is that if, I would love it if that became kind of the standard. The mayor is one of 9 city councilors, has every right to be a strong advocate for particular positions, but I've never liked the fact that they would sort of use the sort of prominence of the chair while doing so.
It's just to play devil's advocate. I think I haven't seen that too often, and I certainly think symbolically that's important. But one of the things I always say is that and this is the hard part, is I think for me it's been hard, is that you can't say, right now I'm wearing my hat as an elected official, and then now I'm wearing my hat as a parent. And I never went to school council meetings at my kid's school, right? So I gave up that parental role or opportunity because I knew the minute I walked in that room, I couldn't say, I'm here as Nick's dad, not Marc McGovern, the school committee member, because
Exactly.
that's how everybody saw me.
That's it.
So even if you're the mayor and you step down to that seat, you're still the mayor. And I think, so I think it's probably better than not doing it.
Yeah. I think it's
But
sort
people
of
are still looking at you as the mayor.
right, but I think there is a statement then being made. It says, now please accept what I'm doing at this moment here as an advocate and not as your chair.
Yeah.
And, my opinion is that the really, one of the most important things the chair does is actually when they do the appointment of the committees and the choice of the chairs of the committees. And for that, a mayor has to be a sort of a peacemaker, sort of accommodating people's desires, but doing so in a way that doesn't really give the impression of, running people over.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
actually, do you have any choices yet of, if I might put you on the spot?
Sure.
Well,
Well,
what committees, what current committees, or, since this is a topic I've spoken with some others about, of what new committees even could be invented that you would feel like you want to be a part of, or maybe even chair?
yeah, I'm not sure we need to add more committees.
I've heard some discussion emerging.
Because you can have an ad hoc committee, you can have a task force. There are things that you can do to move forward, an
On
issue
specific issues.
without creating a standing committee that then becomes part of the rules. And,
Yep.
So I'm not sure that we necessarily need more.
Actually, wasn't on the school committee, there was a term or two where there were no committees, right?
It was one term. It was the term I wasn't there.
Right.
I actually pushed to get them back when I
Yeah,
got back
yeah.
on. Because there's a lot of, I think that can be where a lot of the good work happens.
Ideally, it would be great if they could really, really wrestle it and make good use of council committees.
Yeah, and that's true with a lot of, it's, we had a conversation last night at City Council. There's, Councilor Simmons put in this motion to do a roundtable with the school committee, and
Right.
I think we have to talk about how we do roundtables, right? And what are the goals of roundtables? There's nothing, I think, for me, more frustrating than having a 2-hour meeting where all the elected officials talk and then we walk away not having moved the issue forward. I want to come in and here's what we're going to try to solve. Let's work on this. Let's actually come out of the meeting having accomplished something.
When
we can all talk.
Oh,
Plenty
yeah.
of opportunities
When
to do that.
they first instituted the roundtable meetings, which was about, 6 terms ago, somewhere around 2000, I think actually Catherine Triana-Feely was one of the biggest advocates for that change. The real idea was, there's certain things, like as an elected city councilor, you can't kind of put somebody working for a particular department on the spot. It's actually a felony to do so. But at these roundtable meetings, you would actually bring together people from one or two departments, and you would have a free-flowing discussion between the people who are actually doing the job down in the trenches and the elected officials who are representing the people. And that was great. It wasn't so much just sort of a discussion amongst elected officials.
Right,
It was between elected officials and people who were, sort of the people executing city policy in the departments.
Yeah, no, I think
That would be ideal.
Yeah, and Councilor Kelly brought up, last night that he hasn't always been happy with the way the meetings have run, and maybe I'm not as disappointed as he's been in them, but I think it's a decent point that we should look at what are the goals of these roundtables, how do we achieve those goals, and what is it that we want to get out of it, so that we actually can be more productive for the city.
Yeah, that's the main thing, and that's the only thing I really want to see happen is just that, I will trust the future of the next 2 years to these 9 people. Whether I love them, dislike them, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're a pretty good representative mix, and they can fight it out, and I think it'll be fine. But I do want to see them productive.
Yeah.
That's it's sort of now just being kind of the chronic civic observer of things. I just want things to happen.
Yeah.
Not like a runaway train happen or anything like that, but be substantial, make things happen. Have the committees not just be a home for the chair's pet projects, but just sort of be the place where you conduct the city's business. Anyway, that's my That's my editorial.
Yeah, no, and I think, and I think that's a good one, and I think that, when I looked at committees, and I tried to sort of match up things that I'm interested in doing with what committee it would best fit, and so when, we were all asked to fill out a sheet about what we were interested in, I tried to keep it to, how do those committees partner with the things that I want to do, so that I can, hopefully if I get appointed to those committees, either as a member or a chair, you can actually do some real work to move some things forward.
Yeah, I'm not yet convinced that the particular committees that exist, which have not always been in existence. So the Neighborhood and Long-Term Planning Committee was created like a decade or something ago. There was a Public Health Commission. I think Marjorie created that, but that was kind of split off from the Environment and Public Health. Yeah. So it's not like the committee structure are these sort of absolutely permanent things. Finance, ordinance, absolutely. Right, governance. But there's some flexibility here, and I hope people will give a little thought to that.
Yeah, no, I think, Mayor Marr has talked about that. I think other people have talked about that. There's all kinds of issues around quorums and all these things that have come up that we have to address around committees. And
I've always felt people should be a little more respectful of having quorums for meetings. Having a committee meeting where it's just one person isn't really in the spirit of things.
Right. No. No, if you're on a committee, you should. I wouldn't say that my attendance on subcommittee meetings for school committee has always been perfect, but I think you could probably count on one hand the number that I actually missed. That's your job. That's what you're paid for. That's why we've asked to be there. The least we can do is be there.
Yeah. So, are there particular things now, as an elected city councilor, as opposed to a school committee member, that that you would? And again, now this is sort of post-election. This is, if elected, I'll do this and that. But now that you're in the seat and you're out there, are there some particular things that you sort of are looking at in the short term or over a 2-year period that are sort of things that you really want to make things happen?
Yeah. They're not too different than what I talked about.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully, right? The early childhood education, universal pre-K. But it's sort of beyond pre-K too. How do we ensure that children ages 0 to 4, or until they, whatever we finally decide is the age to enter the public schools, right? It's 4.5 now. How do we ensure that every child in Cambridge has an opportunity for an affordable, high-quality early childhood experience? That could happen in a home daycare setting. It could happen in a private daycare setting. It could happen in a city program. But how do we make sure that all kids get that, and that we make it accessible to people? When Marjorie Decker and I chaired the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Early Childhood Education and Care, accessibility and affordability were the two main things. And so you had a lot of folks who, just really couldn't afford to send their kids to a program that they wanted, and whether that was a home daycare or a private daycare or preschool. And so, I think the city really, the city has to take that on. I said during the election that the city council has a vital role to play in helping the schools. They don't often know what it is. And so it gets muddied in curriculum and staffing, which is not the city council's role. If we really want to help the public schools, affordable, accessible, high-quality early childhood education for every child in Cambridge, and that's how you do it.
The baton has been passed to you by people like Marjorie and former councillor Ken Reeves, who certainly made this.
Ken was amazing.
He's huge. He's absolutely huge on this. You guys do have an obligation, and I know it's not just you. Actually, I'm really kind of hopeful because I've seen some of your fellow councillors have definitely talked it up and have made this sort of an issue, and I'd like to see him move on that.
Yeah, it was great. During it was very encouraging during the election, and I would sort of say it sort of half in tongue in cheek, but truthfully, basically everybody, certainly the 9 that got elected, but pretty much across the board, and the candidates talked about early childhood education being a priority. So I am ecstatic. It's something I've talked about for a long time. I'm glad that there's others now, prioritizing it, and I really think that we can move that ball.
Well, you also have the great advantage having a city administration, from the Human Services Department all the way up to the city manager's office, who I think are of exactly the same mind. Yeah. To make good things happen.
Yeah, and what this city does for kids is something that you don't see anywhere else. The example I use is the city-run camps in the summer.
Yeah.
Terrific, right? Terrific. My son goes to the West Cambridge Youth Center for summer camp. A beautiful building, fantastic staff, and it's 9 in the morning till 5 o'clock at night. He is a full pay camper. I don't get any financial aid, and I pay $80 a week.
Yeah.
Why anybody would send their kids to a private camp? I mean,
Yeah. Right.
and that gets subsidized by the city, right? So, you know, that's just one example of the things that the city has always said. You know, we are so committed to children, and they put their money behind it, and it's great because you just don't see that in a lot of other places.
No, it's kind of a nice thing to be an elected official in a city where you know that if there's enough will to make a good thing happen, that you'll actually have cooperation from the city administration to make it happen.
Right, absolutely.
You know, and I certainly look forward to that. Well, we actually only have about a minute left.
Okay.
Amazingly so here.
Want me to juggle or something?
Yeah, we could sort of do that here. But one of the things I just thought maybe a quote that I saw you actually posted on Facebook was recently. It had to do with sort of the evolving face of Cambridge as a place where middle-income people could actually raise a family, and how that's a lot harder to do these days. So, you know, I thought maybe I'd just sort of give you a half a minute.
Yeah, sure. It's like the candidate forums already.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
how are you going to solve the affordable housing crisis?
Done.
30 seconds.
Done.
No, but I do think that's true. I think that you know, we have rents and housing prices that are really high, and we have public housing, and I think you have a lot of people who they make too much money to qualify for things, but not enough money to afford things. And so, you know, how do we make sure that we're keeping those people in the city and taking care of those people as well? We certainly need to do more on the low-income piece too, but there's a lot of teachers and firefighters and police officers who used to be able to buy a home here and now can't.
Yep, it's the toughest.
That's my best in 20 seconds.
Toughest nut to crack. Anyway,